Hi, my name is Tarrant and welcome to a British Audiophile. Just over a month ago, I took my Proac Response 1SC speakers off the stands and put on the Proac S400s, for which I'm working on a review. I've still got to try those speakers out with a couple of different amplifiers and in a different room, and then I think I'll pretty much be ready to start posting or start working on posting that review. So hopefully not too long to wait for those of you who follow this channel. At the time when I took the Proacs off the stands, I noticed that one of the speaker binding posts had come loose, and I thought this is a good opportunity to take the back panel off, tighten up those binding posts and have a look inside. And I took a bunch of photos, and what I'd like to do is share with you what I found inside the speakers. It'd be interesting to see. So these speakers retailed for £1,500 20 odd years ago. The current model, which is the DB1, retails for about £2,000. It's almost identical in terms of design. So what do you get for your money inside a £2,000 speaker? Okay, so let's take a look at the cabinet first. What you'll notice when I take the back panel off is that inside it has this polyfill wrap that goes all the way around. And that's quite typical of any speaker at this price point and below, that you'll have that, and that's there to kind of dampen down internal standing waves and absorb some of the energy inside the speaker from the woofer moving in and out. Now, once I remove the polyfill, you'll notice that the cabinet itself is made out of 3/4 of an inch of MDF. Now, that's slightly thinner than the norm. The norm is, say, 1 inch MDF, and a number of designs use this kind of thinner wall cabinets. Classic BBC LS3 5A monitor, Harbaths, Dynaudio speakers, some of them, the Proac S400s, and a whole bunch of British monitors, including the Proac. And the reason they have this slightly thinner cabinet is that every cabinet resonates, and the resonant frequency is determined by the material, the size, and the thickness of the actual wall itself, the thickness of the cabinet. So by having a thinner construction on the cabinet, they're tuning the resonant frequency to a point where they think it's more appealing to the ear, and that's around the 150 to 300 hertz range. The Proac Response 1SCs have a resonance typically around 300 hertz from the cabinet, and that's associated with warm woody sounds, and it's considered to be a little bit more pleasant than having resonances higher up the frequency range. So that's what they're trying to do there. What's unusual, and I found quite surprising, is that they'd stapled panels. If you have a look, there's a panel on the top, the sides and the bottom. So I was a little bit perplexed originally as to why would you go to the trouble of having this thin sidewall construction and then stapling these panels on, which effectively makes it thicker. So perhaps somebody out there who perhaps has a little bit more detailed knowledge of this can answer the question, but the only thing I could think of was that they are trying to fine-tune those resonances. It's a little bit of extra damping and getting it exactly right. So by doing that, they can vary the size and the thickness of those internal kind of panels that they've stapled on, and they can fine-tune the cabinet resonances to exactly where they want. So let's move on to the drivers themselves. You can look at the back of the tweeter there, and you'll notice that it's a sealed enclosure, and it's a 3/4 of an inch soft dome tweeter, which you can't see from the back of the photos, but you can certainly see from the front. And it's still unclear to me as to which manufacturer Proac used. They have used different manufacturers over the years for different drivers. And I know that ScanSpeak have a replacement tweeter. It's about £70 for this. Whether that's the same as the original one, can't say for sure. There's some talk about them using SEAS, which is SEAS tweeters. They're both very respectable manufacturers. The mid-bass woofer is based around a 5-inch polypropylene cone. It's manufactured for Proac by Peerless, that's a well-known, well-respected driver manufacturer, and it's very much a Stuart Tyler design. He gave them the specifications. He's the CEO, founder and chief designer of Proac, and it's distinguishable by its copper phase plug, and that copper extends through to the magnet assembly that you can see at the back. So very much a bespoke Proac design, manufactured for them, as I say, by Peerless. So let's take a look at the back panel itself. On the back panel you'll see the port and you'll see the crossover with a bunch of passive components. Now there are two air core inductors. Those are those white spools that you can see with wire wrapped round a bobbin, and they're air core inductors. That's nice to see. You'd expect to see air core inductors at this kind of price point as opposed to iron core inductors. Iron core inductors would have an iron rod in the middle. The benefit of iron core inductors are they're cheaper, so you can get the same level of inductance off a lot less copper, which makes it cheaper. The problem is that they saturate, the magnetic field tends to saturate more easily. As a result, it produces a distortion which can be unpleasant. So air core inductors don't have that problem. The problem they have is that they're more expensive. In order to get the same level of inductance, you need more turns on the wire. That adds DC resistance, which is a separate problem. To overcome the DC resistance, what you need to do is have a thicker gauge of wire. So not only do you need more turns, but you need the wire to be thicker as well. That adds weight and adds expense. As a result, air core inductors are far better, but also far more expensive than iron core inductors in these kind of applications. So it's nice to see two air core inductors. Moving on, there are three polypropylene capacitors. Those are the black capacitors that you can see. I'll get into polypropylene versus electrolytic capacitors in a second when I talk about some of the other capacitors that are there. But what I'd like to say is they're manufactured by Solon. That's a well-respected French manufacturer of these capacitors. They're about £3 a pop. It's kind of the level you'd expect to see at this price point of speaker. There are more expensive ones that have even lower ESR, that's electric series resistance, but these are good quality from a good well-respected manufacturer, and what you'd expect to see at this kind of price point. There are two ceramic wire wound resistors there. Those are the white rectangular objects that you can see, and they retail for about £1 a piece. And they're again typically what you tend to see below this price point and even around this price point and a bit higher. So the Bucar S400s have them, the ATCs have them, the Proacs have them, Dyne Audio Special 40s have them, and you can detect a little bit of disappointment in my voice, and the reason is that they have a high inductance and a fairly wide tolerance of plus or minus 5 or 10%. There are better resistors out there which have much lower inductance and a much tighter tolerance, and they probably start off at around £3 a piece. So I think it's a little bit mean of manufacturers to kind of penny pinch at this price point and put these kind of high inductance, wide tolerance kind of resistors in there. The last two components on there I think are electrolytic capacitors. One of them most definitely is an electrolytic capacitor. It's from Alcap, it's a well-known manufacturer, and the other one I'm almost certain is an electrolytic capacitor as well, although I can't see any markings. Perhaps someone could shed some light if it isn't. And I'm not quite sure what an electrolytic capacitor is doing there at this level, and I'll just explain the difference between electrolytic capacitors and polypropylene capacitors. So the benefit of an electrolytic capacitor is that it's cheap. They retail for typically £1 a piece, and they have a high ESR, which is electrical series resistance, which tends to vary with temperature and frequency. So they have a non kind of linear response, and over 15-20 years they tend to dry up and their tolerance shifts, so they're not so reliable as they age. You have to replace them after 15-20 years, and that's why sometimes you have to recap your amplifier because it has an awful lot of electrolytic capacitors in there. Polypropylene capacitors are linear. They are much lower distortion, they have lower losses, they do not drift with temperature and frequency, and they can potentially last a lifetime. So not sure why they put an electrolytic capacitor in this crossover network. It's not something I would expect at this kind of price point, but it's there, and there may be a good reason. I'm not a speaker designer, so I can't really say why. It perhaps is suitable for a certain application which I'm not aware of. Okay, so hopefully you've enjoyed this short whistle-stop tour of my Proac Response 1 SCs from the inside. I certainly found it interesting. A lot of the stuff that I saw there was what I expected to see. There were a couple of surprises. I didn't expect to see that electrolytic cap there. Again, perhaps somebody with better knowledge than me. There's people out there who are DIY enthusiasts and speaker designers who'll be able to shed some light as to perhaps why that's there. Also, what was a surprise was those panels that were bolted on to each of the surfaces on the inside. Like I said, I was scratching my head to figure out why that was there, and the only thing I could come up with was that they were obviously trying to tune the resonant frequency to a particular point, and they felt they had better control by doing it that way. But again, perhaps someone could shed some light on that. What did you think? What you expected? Surprised? Was it informative? Please share in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next video. So for today, for now, a British audiophile signing off.